was just like a picture of our family, like not looking at the camera, just like Alicia and I just trying to like gather the children. And then I think the front just said, "It's fine. Everything's fine." Just like, instead of like "Merry Christmas, it's been a great year," it's like, "We're fine. We're making it."
Right.
Perfect. So I
Morning.
feel that. Morning, TJ.
How's everybody doing?
We've determined that we're all fine.
You guys are fine?
We're fine.
Me too. I've had a full morning already.
Yeah, same. I have like my sleep's been off all week. I have not slept past 3:30 the whole week. And then today my kids were up at 5:45, which at their ages is early. Like we're normally like 6:45. So, I couldn't even like use my morning like the way I wanted to because I had to parent really early.
I'm sorry. I don't know what it is about this week, but my sleep has been off as well. I've been waking up like at 3 o'clock, just ready to go.
Yeah.
We go to bed early at 9, but it's still not enough. So yeah, I feel fortunate. I finally got a full night of sleep last night. And we have a dog that licks all night and just wakes me up. I think that's what I've had other athletes. The dogs are disturbed this week for some reason, at least in my training logs. People are being woken up in the middle of the night because of the dogs. Or maybe that's just my excuse for having a restless mind when I go to bed, maybe needing to meditate more. Well, thanks for being here, Sarah. I know what it feels like to have a rushed morning, not for the same reasons that you do. I don't like that feeling for myself. I try to avoid it, do things to actively get in front of that kind of stuff because I feel like it challenges the way that then the rest of the day goes. So I guess my expression to you is that I hope that you can bring it down and you end up having a great day that's more relaxed.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for sharing. I know we were hanging out with Drew a lot over the holidays, and I guess that's kind of really in the rearview mirror at this point. But over Christmas, and New Year, we were hanging out with Drew a lot, and I know that Drew's sleep has also been impacted of late as well. And so, we definitely understand that parents have it at a whole different level than the rest of us. So I would say you guys are all like 100-mile training. You could frame that if you wanted to, getting ready to just deal with those late night hours and those early mornings and long races. Yeah, well, I guess, there's Kylee. Kristen should be, there's Kristen. Awesome.
Gang's all here.
Yeah, we have some topics to discuss today. We've got a speed and training topics. We've also got some health and well-being topics as well that I think are really important. And I've kind of put the two together for this week because I feel like, it's also often misunderstood all of the little things that we have to do when we're leveling up in our training to stay healthy. And so overall health and well-being have to kind of be at the forefront of our minds, I think, all the time. Particularly, how we're eating, how we're drinking through the day, how we're dealing with the challenges in the process, the ups and downs, things like that. I mean, at least for me as an athlete, I've been doing this quite a long time now, both as a skier and as a runner. And I think that health and well-being really have to be first. And then the speed and the intensity and the leveling up in your training comes after that, once you've established strong and healthy habits that support leveling up. And I know, Sarah, your time is limited. So I'm going to start on the health and well-being side this morning, just because I would love to get some of your input in there. And I think, yeah, Kylee, probably some of your input as well, just with regard to eating and drinking. And I actually had something come up in a log this morning that was pretty challenging to hear as a coach, that had to do with eating and drinking during challenging times during the day. So I'd love to get some input from the literal experts in the fields on these kind of things. Yeah. Well, why don't we start with that one? So the question is I'm struggling to get enough food and water on busy days. Between multitasking and not having my own office or place to eat, wearing a mask, it's just hard to get in the water and food that I need. Are there any tips or advice? Maybe I'll start with Kylee, because I know that you give out this kind of advice probably on the regular. What would be a couple just like key points that you would recommend to an athlete struggling to eat?
Yeah, I mean, I think reframing, one thing that helps is honestly reframing the nutrition as part of your training. Because I think that, if you make it a priority, then you're more likely to try to figure out a solution to it. And I think sometimes athletes, they just put off the nutrition piece until it's too late, and then they've already kind of dug themselves into a hole or are injured. So thinking about how is this nutrition going to impact my ability to train and actually achieve my goals as well, and build that time to plan and think about things in even just blocking off the time every week to make that happen, so that it is a priority. And then, I mean, I work with people that are flight paramedics, working 18-hour overnight shifts, extremely busy people. And we've always been able to somehow find a solution to the busyness. So remembering that you don't have to do it all. And we've talked about this on a previous call, that if you need to get pre-prepared meals for yourself, that's okay. Like being okay with admitting, like, I might need some help in this area. Or trying to simplify what you're doing. So sometimes I think people really want to think they need to have all these complex meals. So just a simple, one option, like one breakfast option, one lunch option, like a wrap, overnight oats, whatever that is. And trying to be consistent with that over the week period of time. And then if you are someone in a healthcare profession, again, I've had someone that said, I'm working straight for 10 hours with a mask on with no break. And we talked about it, and we talked about how, you're actually charting throughout that 10 hours. You can take a quick bite of something or drink some things like a shake, some kind of shake or meal replacement shake at that time. So thinking about what your actual patterning is, and again, making the nutrition priority. So trying to figure out what are some ways that I could get in some nutrition. If you forget to eat, then that's another thing, like alarms, reminders. You can still ignore those, but again, going back to reframing your nutrition, just like your PT, your mental health, all of that impacts your ability to train and achieve goals. So it needs to be up there on the nutrition needs to be up there on the priority list. Other than that, redefining what a meal is sometimes too. It doesn't have to be this plate of food. It could be 2 snacks that add up to a meal, or smaller things. I think we have these ideas sometimes, and they impact our ability to actually get in nutrition. So maybe shifting that a little bit as well might help. So those are just some tips, and it's hard to know, it sounds like this person might be in healthcare, which is really difficult, for sure. But I think there are ways around it, like whether you front and back load your shift with food and then snack and meal replacement shake type thing in the middle, etc.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a good list of information, and well, I can't wait to include this in a newsletter or something in the future, because I think that just having like those 8 to 10 bullet points of things to do to help keep yourself focused, and remembering and reframing that your nutrition is an integral part of your training. The two things aren't separate, they're actually connected. And I think that in a roundabout way, when we talk about speed work and training later, getting the fuel that we need directly contributes to how good your running economy is on a given day. The more carbs that you have in your system, the better your running economy is. And so when we're depriving ourselves of these things, it really inhibits our training. Something that came up for me today in my coaching is just this natural reaction that a lot of people have. So when we get really stressed, sometimes our appetites and our thirst mechanism gets suppressed. And as a result of that, we see athletes unintentionally, restricting calories, not getting the caloric intake, the hydration that we need. And this can lead to some pretty negative health outcomes as well as performance outcomes.
If you're not eating your train, like you can't train on an empty stomach. It's not like, oh, we would prefer you don't. Like literally your training will not be productive. So if your choice is between like skipping lunch and getting the run in, or getting lunch in, the most productive training is eating your lunch.
Yeah, Zoe, thank you. I think you say it in a very direct way, which is really important for people to hear. But Sarah, I wanted to maybe refer to you a little bit on this, and see if maybe you've worked with people in your field that have had kind of that stress reaction where the appetite gets suppressed, and or maybe Kylee too, I'm sure you have as well. And if there's any specific tips that you might have.
Well, it's sort of, I'll say like two things, which are two sort of like different approaches or different frameworks. But like one is like setting alarms, right? Like be like, this is a priority. I'm making it a priority. I'm going to schedule it and set the alarms. And that's a really good way to like jumpstart things and get you doing what you need to do and eating. But I would say like the bigger picture thing is that sounds like some disconnection between your like the signals that your body's sending and what you're hearing, right? And so if we're not hearing our hunger cues, that means that we're not in tune with our body, which is something we really want to be in tune with our body as runners, because that helps us know our needs and feel injuries and, get the rest that we need and take care of ourselves and all of that. And so, like I talk about every week, mindfulness being a really good way to work on mind-body connection. Really thinking about, or like doing runs that are really focused on the breath, or focused on like your footsteps, and trying to do some of that mind-body integration. So yeah, I think when I hear I don't feel hunger cues, I'm thinking, okay, what other signals is our body sending that we're not hearing? Then that's the first place I'd go.
Makes me think of a Coach Sarah snack break.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think recognizing again the importance of the mind-body connection, we're building awareness, and we're using that awareness to then have more informed and better responses later. So often when I see athletes, reflecting on, well, I was stressed, so I didn't eat, and X, Y, and Z happened as a result, they're kind of putting those pieces together, but that's only one step in the process. So we've built the awareness there, but then we also need to turn that awareness into a response. We need to be aware of that happening in the moment so we can get in front of it. And especially important if this is a habit that a coach is seeing, a pattern that's developing, a behavioral pattern, to then try to use that kind of consistent cue that you're getting to then make a change. You really want to be able to say, okay, this is happening to me. I'm realizing I haven't eaten all day, and when this happens, I do this for 2 or 3 days in a row and X, Y, and Z happens. And if I can get in front of that on day 1, that's going to help, clear a path to day 2 and 3, where I'm not feeling quite as bad, where I'm starting to get it in front of this. Kylee, when athletes feel like their hunger is suppressed, I know this sometimes can even happen after a big race, after a big training effort, when cortisol levels go up, stress is really high. Do you have any recommendations for foods that would be, maybe more optimal, maybe a little bit more digestible mentally, easier to get in, or less, like heavy, or it doesn't involve quite this big thing that you have to consume on a stomach that doesn't feel like it needs any food?
Yeah, I was actually chatting with a triathlete the other day that is getting into 5-6 hour training days, and we were trying to figure out they need to get in like 5,000 to 6,000 calories, and their appetite is kind of suppressed on those days. So trying to figure out how do we build in, instead of a 200 calorie smoothie, how do we build in a 700 calorie smoothie, something drinkable that you can get in, or like I had said before, smaller snacks that might add up to something bigger, or chili or soup or something that you maybe have in your freezer that you make ahead of time, and then you pull it out before you go on your run in the winter, and then when you get back you have that option. So more liquids are going to be easier to get in, and then if you also focusing on foods that you kind of know you might crave after events or long efforts is something good to do, because I often encounter athletes that are so strict with their diet that it impacts their ability to even get in nutrition. And so, one of the things that I was thinking of when you were talking to Sarah on this is a lot of people want to know, what are my macros? What are my numbers? When do I have these certain things? And that's great. But if you can't implement the things that we're talking about, it really doesn't matter. And that psychological and emotional connection to food and your habits and your patterns, that's ultimately the hardest thing to change. And so you have to, kind of like TJ said, you have to gain awareness around that. And then you have to make some strategic action plan or action steps that are going to help you get past whatever you're being challenged with. So even with the no hunger after runs or training sessions, you've got to figure out a strategy for it and implement that and trial it. Even if you're not hungry, you still need to actually practically fuel. Sarah talked about the listening to hunger and fullness, and there's different definitions of hunger. So there's biological hunger, where we're listening to those biological cues and responding to them. And then practical hunger is practically, I know that my hunger and fullness hormones get altered when I train a lot. So I need to have something, even if I'm not hungry, even if it's hard, I still need to do it. So thinking about that as well.
I would also say if you are stressed to the point that you're experiencing physiological symptoms of stress, like reduced appetite, that's a cue that you also need to reduce training, not just because there's that danger of potentially under fueling, and looking at the research, the majority of overtraining is caused by insufficient fueling. But also, again, if you're experiencing those physiological symptoms, you need to be able to respond by reducing training volume and intensity, because your body can only handle so much cortisol and other different physiological responses to stress, and you just have to adapt accordingly. If you feel like, oh, I was pretty stressed, and so like I didn't eat enough at lunch, but I'm going to do my Wednesday workout anyway. Like don't do that. Like if you're, again, if you are experiencing stress to the extent that you have like physiological symptoms, you need to make a change in your training and work with your coach to do so. And that's okay. Like, it's not like weak that you're like, oh, I'm super stressed. Like that's your body sending a sign, and it makes you very smart and strong and powerful to listen to those signs and act accordingly.
I love that, Zoe. Thank you for reiterating the positive side of this, because I think we often have a natural inclination to be very self-judgmental in moments like this and to beat ourselves up. I know that we have both had struggles with appetite suppression after big efforts. This is like something that I've been working on as an athlete for 5 years. You know, I used to not be able to eat after ultras, and now I'm able to eat like within 2 hours of finishing like a big event, going really hard. And you know, that's something that I'm super proud of. I've had to like really intentionally work at that and develop like that practical understanding of I need the food, even though I don't feel like I want to eat right now.
And like for us, something that's been really effective is focusing on making that like the Saturday after long run meals, like making it really fun, like making tater tot nachos or tacos, like something that feels super fun and isn't like crazy hard to make. Sometimes you're really tired, and that really helps us, you know, not get bogged down in like, you know, what are my macros? And like, you know, outside of making sure we get enough protein, sometimes we'll add in a shake. Sometimes really, really just making food and fueling a fun and stress-free experience can be so powerful for athletes.
Yeah, I know a bunch of other athlete or coaches want to comment on this. So let's do a quick roundtable, but let's start with Sarah, because I know you have to go in a few minutes.
So I just, you know, I think yes, there's real appetite suppression that happens from all of that, like that you guys are talking about. And I think that especially with folks who have a history, maybe with an unhealthy relationship with food, that there's like, I'm not hungry because I'm distracting myself from my hunger cues, or I'm staying busy on purpose so that I don't think about how hungry I am. And then I like convince myself that I'm not hungry. And so I think like, right, even if we're scheduling in times and maybe we're not necessarily hungry, like, I don't know, you're not ready to eat, but even checking it, if you take just that pause and you're like, okay, this is a time I should eat, and I'm going to stop and ask myself if I'm hungry. So like, I think like maybe we get through our day and we're never like told just because we don't stop and check in. And so maybe we like, if you're not ready to say, okay, I'm going to schedule in my eating times, we'll schedule in some check-in times. Like, can you check in with yourself every however many hours and ask yourself if you're hungry? And then, you know, I think there's a lot to explore if you do find that you're really, you know, ignoring those cues or don't want to be hungry and purposely are distracting yourself.
Yeah, if you're struggling with like being able to sit with and listen to those cues, definitely reach out to an experienced mental health and nutrition expert to work through that, because as athletes, I mean, there's so much harmful cultural messaging around like, you know, like how to or how to not listen to your body. If that's something that you find your wires might be getting crossed on, there are a lot of resources available, and we have a lot on the team or, you know, like in our team's orbit, and we're always happy to help connect folks. But I think that's so important, particularly like there's, you know, in a group of endurance athletes, like the rate of folks that have had either eating disorders or disordered eating patterns is going to be like a little bit higher than the general population. And that's totally normal and fine. Or, you know, it's not like, it's not something we want to normalize, but like, we're not alone on this team. You're not the only person who struggles when like, if like when stress happens, you start to lean on challenging coping mechanisms. Like, we are here to help you work through that and connect you with a resource that will help steer you towards a more loving and compassionate relationship with your body, your brain, and the cues that are going in between those things.
Yeah, thank you. Great reminders, Zoe. Kristen, I want to turn it over to you because you mentioned, and I thought you had like a very compassionate and empathetic view on this. I know that personally, you know, you've been doing a lot of alarm setting stuff like that. You've mentioned that on previous calls. Yeah, how has that worked for you, and how have you kind of dealt with maybe missing some alarms?
Yeah, that's a great question. I set alarms for everything from, snacks, like mid-morning snacks, to water alarms, to like, I have a, to-do list every day, and I'll put like, circles or water droplets or whatever. And like, I get so psyched to like fill in those water droplets every time I finish a cup of water. And so that's something that I really, that is really helpful for me to like keep track of and get excited about, like filling in those little dots, which might just, be helpful for some people, or it might just be a Kristen thing. I don't know. But one thing that like on super duper stressful days, if I do miss a snack or a meal or something, and, a lot of times if I'm like super high stress, adding more physical stress via running or weight training or cross training doesn't help me. And I think that that's pretty common. I think, like if you're already feeling psychological stress, work stress, whatever, and then you add in a 10-mile run, you're not going to feel any better, especially if you haven't eaten. So sometimes it's kind of like, I know in the back of my mind that I have to prioritize ahead of time if I want to get my run in. Like if I don't get my run in immediately in the morning and I know I'm going to have a busy day, it's like, okay, well, my priority here is to fuel well throughout the day so that I have a good run at the end of all of this. And if I don't fuel well, I know that A, I'm either not going to run, or B, my run is going to cause me even more stress on an already stressful day. So kind of being able to work that in compassion for yourself if you do miss a snack or a meal or something, and not trying to like overindulge and like overeat some leverage.
Yeah, I think that's so important to, thank you, to recognize that one, if you see yourself falling into some of these patterns of not eating the way that you should, the wise thing to do as an athlete is to reduce your training. I've seen it time and time again. Athletes not right the ship quick enough, continue to try to train, and then need to take multiple days off in order to get back on track. It's very easy as runners, especially, really it's for anybody of any level who is continuing to work on progressing in their training. To level up all the time means to do a little bit more than you were doing before, which inherently has more caloric demands, more energy needs for the body. And therefore, in those situations, you have to be well fueled or you end up in a deficit. And so when we can give ourselves that compassion and say, you know what, today I've been really stressed, like adding more training stress isn't a great answer to that stress. And I can really look realistically at everything that's been going on very pragmatically and say, hey, I haven't fueled well today. So that's another thing to check off the box that says I should probably rest today or do less training in response. And also, when you're working through these things, developing your checklist, you're figuring out what alarms to use. And, we miss these things sometimes. This is about progress, not perfection. The perfectionist mindset can be very challenging for athletes. Again, refer to the newsletter from this week on finite and infinite games, touches a lot on the idea of perfectionism. If we get wrapped up in that, we end up down this rabbit hole of self-judgment, and it becomes very hard to, again, right the ship or to introduce new and healthier habits. Coach Drew, you're a really busy guy. You're a dad, you're training hard, you're running, 2 running stores. What do you do on a daily basis to remind yourself to get the fuel that you need? How do you deal with struggling to get enough food and water? What's kind of your program?
It's really different from work to home. My home life is a little crazier than my work life, believe it or not. But the idea for me is I don't have the ability to set alarms and to stop and drink and stop and eat whenever those alarm goes off. My day is much more fluid. And I just have to make or take advantage of windows as they come up, which can be really difficult. And I can find myself being in caloric deficits or find myself being dehydrated at the end of the day. And so I'll be the first to admit that I'm far from perfect. I am continuing to work on this. I didn't write this question, but I really identify with this question. And so it's tough. Something that I wrote in the chat that I'll say out loud, just so people listening later can hear, is that this topic and sleep and running and your plyometrics and your stretching and like literally everything that you do in your training, regardless of what event you're training for, needs to be something that's practiced on a daily basis. None of us are perfect in any of those categories. And so all of us have to continue to work and understand that failing happens, that we all don't have perfect days every day. And just to give yourself grace and to keep working at it. As far as strategies for eating and drinking, I don't know that I'm learning as much as everyone else is really, but just trying to make the most of your opportunities as they come and trying to be efficient with the time that you have. I can't at work, I can't make a lunch and sit down at a table by myself and eat for 20 minutes. I just don't. So I'm constantly taking bites here and there as I'm checking in shoes or between customers or at home trying to like change a diaper, wash my hands, and on my way back to the next kid, grab a snack on the way, just all kinds of stuff like that. So keep working at it, be patient with yourself, and understand that perfection is hard to come by, but we can all do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that like process of continual progress is really key. That's what all of this is about. That's how you develop a program that's sustainable for you. Everything that we're doing as athletes is about slow but continual growth. So if we're wrapped up in the fact that we mess something up today, that can really hinder the process of making a change tomorrow. So I want you guys to remember that. And like, those are just such great words, Drew. I also really appreciated in the chat box, you mentioned just not being worried about grabbing grab and go items that don't need to be heated up or refrigerated. Just having really simple foods on hand that allow you to eat.
Shout out to the wraps at Whole Foods.
Yeah,
You
seriously.
make us who we are.
I know. Thank God those are back. Without those are huge.
Buffalo wraps for life.
I was just gonna add one more thing.
Go, Kylie.
You guys mentioned the grab and go stuff, like thinking about, actually having your stuff available and making sure you've got your shopping and all of that done for the week can really set you up well too. Like just making your environment the easiest it can be for you to grab the foods that you need. So I always say, like, try to make it a priority. You don't need to be meal prepping 10 hours a day on the weekend. Just carve out that time, like it could be like 20 minutes in the evening, get your partner involved, whatever, like get your kids involved, try to carve out that consistent time every week to get the plan done. And you're either do online grocery order or order your like pre-prepared meals or whatever. So you set yourself up well for that environment,
Yeah, you do not need to be Gwyneth Paltrow when you're like a busy person who's running and training and like has a family. Like fucking eat a buffalo wrap, like get the food in, don't. And like often I think athletes will have like their idea of like, this is like in a perfect world how I would eat. And that is such an unhelpful concept, because I think often that idealized version keeps them from taking like 2 to 3 practical steps in the right direction. Because they're like, well, I was going to do 10 hours of meal prep on Sunday, but then life happened and we got home late from church and my kid got sick. And so now I don't have food for the week, when it's like, I don't know, just like go to Whole Foods and get 5 sandwiches that someone else made for you for the week, and then make a giant pot of chili, and boom, that's 2 steps in the right direction. Is it perfect? No, but it's better than like having that black or white mindset of like, I either, do the like perfect Instagram meal prep, or I have that's it. That's all there is.
There's definitely a balance, I think, between the two. Thank you, Zoe. Well, let's move on. I think, now that we've kind of formed the foundation in some healthy eating habits, and just ways to deal with moments where our eating gets derailed, we've got that foundation. Let's think about this in the context of like why it's important. We want to use this to support our training. We're all looking to level up as athletes. That's why we're involved in this process. And so, the first thing that I think about when, like I'm getting my food in the morning before I go train is like some extra carbohydrates, because those literally correlate to better running economy. And so we talk a lot about running economy. It's been a while since we defined what that is. Zoe, you want to define what running economy is?
Running economy is basically like how efficient you are. So like given a certain amount of oxygen in your body, it's how much running you can get out of that oxygen. You can think about it like fuel efficiency for a vehicle, right? Like an inefficient Hummer would be someone like, if you have like a given size gas tank, how far can you go with that? And running training, we're looking to both increase the gas tank through higher anaerobic work, threshold work, speed work that helps us increase how much, basically like how well you're able to process oxygen, and economy is what you're able to do with that processed oxygen. So it's thinking about like running more efficiently and easily. I think a lot of people, newer people, come into training and they think like, we're going to go hard. I'm going to get really good at running hard. And what good training actually is making running feel easier. So for good running economy, you basically want to be, there's a lot of different ways to develop it, right? And it's like we look at really high-end work. So strides help develop running economy by reinforcing a more ideal biomechanics, because when you're running smooth, like when you're striding, if you use the word sprint in the log, you're going to get a whole lecture. Don't use it. We're not sprinting. We're striding. It should be very smooth and flowy. And that's basically forcing your body to practice idealized technique. And that helps make you more biomechanically efficient. Running easily and smoothly and slowly is a word that could be used. I don't like the word slow because it's all relative, right? We're all faster than someone, we're all slower than someone else. That also reinforces how well your body is able to move with a given amount of oxygen. So it's basically just your fuel efficiency. And instead of making you really good at being inefficient, we're going to make you efficient.
That was great definition. And I think you also gave some really good feedback into some of the ways that we work on, just improving our economy and our efficiency. And some really key words that Zoe was using there were fast over hard, smooth over hard, or forced.
Yeah, we don't want to be strained or running hard.
Yeah, so I think for athletes, especially newer athletes, just a couple of years of working with a coach, maybe 2-3 years of working with a coach, you start to develop that understanding that smoothness is much more efficient, smoothness is much more sustainable. The more we're straining for these kind of things, the less the less sustainable it is.
And I think another big misconception a lot of folks come in with is fitness versus running economy. And like, if you want to be good at running, being fit is a component, but it's not as important as economy, right? Like there's a reason, someone super fit, like, a pro cyclist can't just like come into a running race and like win everything. It's because to be good at running, you need to like actually practice running. And I think sometimes people mistake being good at running for being fit. And so that's one of the reasons that like excessive cross training or just like a ton of cross training doesn't actually make you that good at running, because even though it may provide some aerobic base, ultimately running economy tends to be the more important factor for the majority of events that we're training people for. That starts to break down when you look at things like, hard rock or like really outlier, super long events, super steep events, or super like weird or specific events. But ultimately our goal is to make you a more efficient runner as coaches.
So let's segue into a couple of specific questions about this, Zoe. I think you kind of just with that hard rock remark glossed over something that I often see with athletes If we're looking to, just improve our economy, to become a little more efficient, in very simple terms, to make running feel easier, is it better to focus on more or less vert? Is it better to run more on trails or less on trails?
Yeah, so I think honestly, another big mistake people make when they get into trail running is overemphasizing the importance of vert and overemphasizing the importance of trail. It also really kind of matters what you're talking about when you talk about vert or trail. And I would really say any amount of vert or technicality of trail that causes you to break form and run slower than your average easy pace.
Or power hike.
Like I always tell my athletes, like we really need to try to avoid power hiking during the week. We can power hike on the weekends, particularly when we're going into events that will require power hiking. But like if you're going out to tag summits on like every run and you're running trails on every workout, you're not going to get the same benefits from that speed work or even from that easy lower end aerobic work, because you're not actually practicing the most efficient biomechanical form. You're practicing inefficient biomechanical form because you're stepping over roots and rocks, and that's not all that helpful actually. So like you see a lot of like the more competitive trail runners train on roads, on the track, or on like faster trail. And I'm not saying like never run trail, particularly if you're going to do a trail race that is quite technical. We do want to practice some amount of trail running on race similar terrain that's going to emphasize the same sort of neuromuscular movement patterns that you'll experience in the race, but you will become a much better runner by running on surfaces and terrains that facilitate economic development.
Yeah, and that translates very well over to running faster up hills and running faster on technical trails, because when you've developed those sound fundamentals, then you get more out of each step, even if that step is unbalanced, even if that step is in technical terrain. But the purpose is just like developing strong habits around health and well-being. We're developing a foundation, and then with that foundation you level up over time. And so like a pitfall in the process that I often see as a coach is athletes really invest themselves heavily in doing a lot of vert, heavily in running a lot of technical trails at the detriment of developing some of those fundamentals, especially early on in the process.
Yeah.
And then later on in the process, 2-3 years down the line of working with the coach, when you've really started to develop the neuro patterns and, strong biomechanics and all of that, then you start to regain a little bit more autonomy in that kind of the process, and you start to mix in more trail runs during the week. And those runs become much more productive. Rather, in the beginning, those runs are really not that productive. I want to turn it over to the coaches just really quickly on this subject, because I know that all of us here deal with that like on a pretty regular basis with athletes. And so I just wonder what you guys are, how you're explaining that to your athletes, what kind of language you're using. Maybe Kristen, do you want to jump in on this?
Yep. Sorry. I think that this is super important because especially, sorry, am I cutting out? It keeps telling me my internet's unstable.
You sound good right now.
Okay, cool. I like having this conversation with athletes because especially during the winter when there's not a lot of races happening, unless you're doing like an early season, Moab Red Hot, Black Canyons, something like that. The winter is a really good time to develop speed and focus on running economy so you can continue to develop speed. And so if you live in a mountainous area that has a lot of vert, if you can get like 1,000 to 2,000 feet of vert in any direction within like a 2-mile radius, like, okay, like we can work with that, but you don't need to be hiking or power hiking every run or even every long run if you don't have something on the schedule. And so my goal for athletes is to get them to just run. You don't need to overthink it. You don't need to overcomplicate your training by saying, I'm going to do this trail for 43 minutes and 20 seconds and then turn around and run over here for 18 minutes and 4 seconds. Like, it's just running, you know, and especially with these like longer adventure runs on the weekends, and specifically like, you know, talking to athletes who don't have races coming up and are still in the build phase, there's no need to go post hole for 4 hours when you can get the same distance covered in, you know, 45 minutes. Just my opinion.
It's not just your opinion. Like, we have so much research that backs this up. And I get so frustrated when athletes are like, no, I need to practice my power hiking. Like, it makes me feel stronger. And like, I love that you feel that way, but like, we have science. So
yeah,
thank you for your input.
Yeah, listening to the science and also like focusing on efficiency over what someone's going to look at your Strava and think like, ooh, they got 4,000 feet of climbing. They must be really fast. You know, it's like,
yeah, there's like definitely a specific kind of like Colorado dude who has that like huge, like vert Strava flex. And that's like always a guy I'm going to beat in races.
Right.
Unless it's like, it's a running race. And also if like it's hiking, your hiking will benefit from increased aerobic adaptations that you get from running on like, again, I'm not saying never hike, but like hiking does not make you a better runner, but running will make you a better hiker. So like train two things at once instead of just one thing.
Right.
And also you practice hiking a lot, like walking around in daily life, going up the stairs, like boom.
Hiking. I think
I always power hike the stairs.
That's super important. And if you're, you know, if you really wanted to unpack this and dive into the science, like we could go into like heart rate variability on the uphill versus the downhill and how, you know, what's more efficient. Like it's not going uphill. So just keeping that in mind. I get kind of fired up about it, but trust the science, guys. I mean, just run. Don't overthink it.
Yeah.
I think fast runners like yourself who do really well on hilly and steep races always get fired up on it because you are very easily able to make the connection between building speed and developing economy. And then you see the tangible results later down the line in your adventures and in your races and stuff. And with other athletes, you know, they haven't quite made those connections yet. So that can be I think hard to, at least for me coaching, it's sometimes challenging to have to give the same information out over and over again. It's like, yes, I keep telling you, you know, you don't need to do 2,000 feet of vert on your Tuesday run before your speed workout. Like that might not be advantageous. It's taking you 2 hours to do 4 miles and you're complaining about not having enough time to get the training done. But if you were to do that training in flatter terrain, can still be on the trails. It could just be over, you know, gentler trails. You would get a lot of time back in your day. You'd actually be benefiting your long-term growth as a runner by developing the neural pathways that you need to do the thing that you want to do better. And so, yeah, I think as coaches, it's our job to try to paint that picture like you did, Kristen, to try to more easily allow people to make that connection for themselves. Because sometimes you have to make it for yourself. It doesn't matter how many times someone tells it to you. You don't get it until you've really seen it for yourself right there. Yeah, just before we move on to another question, I wondered if Kylee or Drew wanted to add any input to this one.
Or even Sarah. Sarah's training for a pretty steep race right now. So
let me say this real quick before we move on, that when we're using, I guess, words like road running and fast and things like that, sometimes for a lot of trail runners, those can be kind of like red flags or buzzwords that make them feel uncomfortable. We're not telling you or trying to convert you into like running Boston qualifying times on road marathons. What we're trying to do is get at the point of the question is improve running economy, neuromuscular adaptation, biomechanical practice, your form, stuff like that is easier to practice. It's easier to obtain on flatter, less technical surfaces. So just wanted to make sure that people aren't getting freaked out by us telling them run more roads or run faster. It's all, we're practicing different, I guess, subjects within like the run economy topic. It's very broad. There's lots of pieces, but just want to throw that out there.
Love that, Drew.
Yeah, that was Great. Thank
Spot
you.
on.
Keeping us in
For
line
the
over here.
triggered trail runners amongst us.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Let's just talk about prescribed workouts for a minute. I know that a lot of athletes struggle with prescribed workouts, that they are not prescribed in such detail as precise paces or precise heart rate targets. And we have many times gone into the pitfalls of why we don't look at that data and those metrics. Refer to the recent blog post on finite versus infinite games for a long-term approach to success in training. But let's dive into effort. How do we qualify those efforts? How do we really feel more or less like we're going at the proper effort for the given workout? The question is, coaches often prescribe workouts by effort. How do you know your 5K effort versus 10K effort versus 1 hour effort? Such a good question. I know I'm going to turn it to you, Zoe, because we've done this one in the past and you've always had a very succinct and direct answer.
Yeah. So, you know, it's total, like, you do not need to go out and run like a 5K time trial to really hone in your workouts. We're really looking at approximations, which is fine because your body approximates things. Your body does not actually know or give a shit the difference between like a 3K and a 5K. Like, it doesn't truly understand that, right? It doesn't know. Energy systems are not as discrete as we might believe. But the guides that I give my athletes when you're looking at something like threshold or tempo, is like your tempo or threshold effort is going to be the hardest effort you could sustain for a full hour. So like, it should feel comfortably hard or hardly comfortable. I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 effort. So it should be like fully doable for 20 minutes. It's just not going to feel amazing. Like, not a spa day, but it's also not like walking on hot coals. And that's kind of some guidance for tempo effort. For 10K effort, even for someone that's never run a 10K, not interested in a 10K, I usually cue that as being around your 40-minute effort. Like, I know that not everyone, like, some people might be faster than that. Some people are going to be slower than that. Doesn't really matter. I think a 40-minute effort gets you just about right, because it's going to be a little bit faster than tempo, but slower than a 5K. If you've run a 10K, like flat at sea level on a track, and you know like what your idealized effort level is for that, great. But again, we're really not trying to look at paces. We're really trying to conceptualize of efforts, because for most of us, tuning into that, like, unless you're really trying to pace a very specific marathon effort, being a marathon pace, being more aware of and in control of your effort and not beholden to a number on a watch or a screen or a heart rate monitor is a much more useful tool than being guided by a flawed algorithm. And again, any wrist-based heart rate measurement is complete garbaggio. Do not look at it even at all. It's not a suggestion, it's a fiction. For 5K effort, I tell people that's going to be around the hardest effort you could sustain for 20 minutes. Even if you can't run a 20-minute 5K, that should get you to about the energy system level that you want to be at for training those. In workouts, we want to never exceed 3K effort. So like, even when you're doing a 1-minute interval, we're not going to go, like, you don't even want to go faster than the hardest you could go for a mile. When you see a 1-minute interval on your schedule, that does not mean the hardest you could go for 1 minute. For most workouts, unless cued otherwise, that's going to be 3K or 5K effort. So the hardest effort you could sustain for 15 to 20 minutes, and you're only holding it for a minute. So you shouldn't feel like you're going to die or explode, or like your soul is going to depart from your body within the context of that interval. It should feel hard, like maybe not even quite walking on hot coals, but like it should feel very doably, I don't want to say easily, but it should feel doably sustainable for that 1 minute. Usually for 2-minute or 2 to 3 minute intervals, we're looking at more of that 10K 40-minute effort. For, you know, usually something that's like for a 4-minute interval to a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute interval to tempo workout, that's going to be that threshold hour effort. I also have like a kind of fun guide on the website called the Not So Serious Guide to Effort that like matches up songs to help you kind of get in the mood of what effort level you're trying to hit. But I always try to steer people away from tuning into paces and really trying to focus on those specific effort levels, because kind of thinking about effort in a given amount of time is a much better way to get your body closer to that energy system that we're trying to target.
Yeah, super important. I think you gave some really solid answers and definitions there to like the 5K, 10K, 1 hour effort cues.
Yeah.
I do, I think with a lot of athletes, even if you're an athlete that is, looking to get a very specific time in the marathon, you're looking to qualify for Boston, or you're doing a really specific half marathon effort, you're looking to, get your PR. Even with those athletes, the majority of the training that I give them is going to be effort-based. The very specific training will be pace-based because we are, then going up against those performance goals. But the majority of that training is always going to be effort-based. This is super, super important because those ranges, like your 5K range or your 10K range, the stronger you get as an athlete, the broader those ranges become. So, starting off, there might be 5 seconds between your 1 hour effort and your 10K effort, or I might be exaggerating that a little bit. It's really going to depend on the person. But as you get better, that range becomes larger. So 10K effort could be 30 seconds a mile difference. And so if we're beholden to always being on the top end of that effort, say your 10K effort, 540 pace, you're really crushing it. You're feeling super, super strong. If you run 540 pace every time and you make it your goal to run 540 pace every single time, you have narrowed down in such finite terms your performance for every single workout that as soon as you come off that, you're struggling with that reference point mentally. It's not a great cue for an athlete to be beholden to that pace all the time. And even when I have athletes who are working towards specific marathon goals, we're looking at, trying to do a 2:30 marathon, or we're going under 3, whatever it is, there's still going to be quite a range of paces that can be useful in a workout that specifies running at your marathon effort. And on a given day, it might be more appropriate to run at the faster end of that range, or on a given day, it might be more appropriate to go a little bit easier if you're feeling some fatigue and things like that. And when we have that room, we don't have quite such specific data points and metrics and reference points. We're better able to deal with the challenges and the ebb and flow of the training. And not everything is just like this referendum on your athletic ability the entire time. That can really be an issue for athletes. So again, we want to think about effort. We want to think about it in broader terms. You might be a watch gazer. Oh, today is 6:10 pace, but last week it was 5:50. I'm not doing good enough. Remember,
your body doesn't know or care.
No, and those ranges are really broad. So you're working the same energy systems, you're getting the same result and provoking the same adaptations. So the more we can steer away from the specific data points, I think the better most people feel mentally after their workouts.
Yeah. And it's just, again, your body doesn't function in discrete energy systems. It doesn't go, oh, I'm running 6-minute pace, that must be my threshold. It really does, tuning into how you feel on a specific day is a much more effective way of targeting the energy system we're wanting to target. Let's
let Sarah take the last word on this before we run out of time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, everything that you guys are talking about just really promotes that mind-body connection piece, right? It is so much more important that you listen to your body and have that dialogue with your body, and that dictates your pace than whatever number is on your watch. The number on your watch has less information than what you have as being the person in your body. So yeah, that mind-body connection piece is just coming up again.
So important. I think we need to link to the Black Box article, blog post and podcast by Steve Magnus for people to kind of really get another perspective on why those data points aren't that helpful, why the risk-based HR systems and all of those readiness scores aren't that helpful. Again, you are your own monitor of all of these systems. Within you have the ability to make all of these strong decisions about your training, about your health and well-being. And the more that you develop a mindfulness muscle, the better able you are to kind of interpret those cues and respond in strong and healthy ways to what you feel. And that's really the key to longevity in this sport for everybody at every level, even from elites all the way to like the most beginner runners. They're all doing that. They're all working to do that better all the time. Well, thanks guys. We are out of time, but we'll be back next Friday. So hope to see you there. Bye. Have a good weekend.